Author Maya Angelou tells the story of a kid who was growing up in her neighborhood, and this kid had a reputation. He was a troublemaker. He got suspended from school. He rebelled in like every possible way. He was in trouble with the law, and his parents, they were so fed up, and they didn't know what to do with him. And so Maya, she says, send him over to my house and let me talk to him. And so the parents forced him to go over to Maya Angelou's house, and he came in, and he had kind of a chip on his shoulder and an attitude, and he slumped down at the kitchen table, and she looks at him, and she sits down next to him, crosses her arms, and says, "Child, it sounds like you need a good listening to." I love that. A good listening to. Don't you think that we're all sort of in need of a good listening to? Today, in Acts chapter 8, there is an Ethiopian eunuch who needs a good listening to. And the new apostle Philip is on fire for the Holy Spirit. He begins preaching and he's following the Holy Spirit, which ends up leading him to this barren road in the wilderness. And as he's sitting there in the barren road in the wilderness, he sees this chariot coming, and he knows that the chariot inside, that there is an Ethiopian eunuch. Now, the Ethiopian eunuch, he is a complicated, powerful man. His job is to be responsible for the Ethiopian queen's entire treasury. In order to be trusted to do this, that means that he experienced some significant abuse as a child. He was physically hurt and maimed so that he would only be able to trustworthy with this treasury. It was made so that he would never have a family of his own, that he would sort of be isolated and alone. So then they thought then he could be trusted because he wouldn't steal anything from the treasury in order to support his own family. This would have been something that he had no choice in the matter. It would have been forced upon him before he was in any sort of age where he could consent to this. And because of all this maiming, he's an outsider. He is not allowed to go into the temple in Jerusalem. He is forced to sort of sit outside the doors and just absorb whatever he can hear on the outside. Imagine it this way. If you loved God and you loved the church and you had to sort of just shiver outside in the cold and hear a little bit through the stained glass windows, just peeking in. And this is what life was like for this Ethiopian. At the same time, he's had all of this trauma, but at the same time, he also has all this power. He is in charge of the entire Ethiopian treasury. So he's a powerful but lonely man. He's this beautiful, interesting character. And can you imagine Philip sitting there with the Holy Spirit, wondering why he's out there on this barren wilderness road when this chariot comes up? So basically, Philip knows that he's been sent to interact with this powerful, lonely man. Philip, in all his boldness, he runs up to the chariot and hears the man reading the prophet Isaiah. And after he's hearing the man reading the prophet Isaiah out loud, he's next to the chariot and he says to the eunuch, he says, "Do you understand what you are reading?" Philip asked. "How can I?" the eunuch says. He says, "Unless someone explains it to me." And then he invites Philip to come into this chariot and to sit with him and to read him. And the passage that the eunuch was struggling with from the book of Isaiah is this passage. He was like a sheep led to the slaughter. Like a lamb before its shearer is silent. He did not open his mouth. In his humiliation, he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth. Ah, goosebumps. Philip sits in this chariot and he can hear this passage and he's listening to the eunuch. He doesn't judge the eunuch. He doesn't fear the eunuch. He doesn't exclude the eunuch. He just sits there and gives him a good listening to. Now, I know that when this eunuch read this passage, this eunuch felt seen and heard, because one time this eunuch was sent to the slaughter. He was like a lamb silent before its shearers. Once he was wounded and humiliated, and his descendants were taken from him. But then Philip does something remarkable. I think Philip just listens to him reflect on this passage. He listens to his pain. He listens to what this eunuch's experience has been like. But then he can tell him about Jesus. About Jesus, a sheep led to the slaughter. About Jesus who was humiliated too. A Jesus who was deprived of justice and deprived of descendants. Can you imagine what that connection must have been like for this Ethiopian eunuch? To hear of a God who experienced what he had experienced as a child. the eunuch and Philip, they stop and they notice that there's some water there on the side of the chariot. And he says, what's going to prevent me from being baptized? And Philip's like, nothing. And they get out and they just do it right there. It is incredible to think about what these two experienced in that great big listening to. You see, it's so beautiful because here we are in Acts chapter 8, and we've already seen fulfilled what we heard about early in Acts when Jesus says to his disciples, I want you to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Meaning here with Philip, the new convert, the Hellenistic Jew convert, that we have reached the ends of the earth, which would have been that time. In 8 chapters, all of that has been fulfilled. Friends, sometimes being a witness to God isn't loud and flashy and proselytizing. Sometimes it's not preachers or standing on the street with a bullhorn trying to get your point across. More than often, I think that good witnessing is just giving someone a good listening to. So who can you listen to today?